The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in Cleveland. Not the gentle kind that whispers against windows, but the heavy, relentless type that seems to wash away more than just dirt from the streets. I sat in my armchair by the window of my small apartment, watching the water stream down the glass, blurring the world outside into an indistinct gray. At 78 years old, I had grown accustomed to this view. The same chair, the same window, the same routine that had defined my life since Margaret died 6 years ago. Wake up, make coffee, read the newspaper, watch the news, go to bed, repeat. It was a life stripped down to its essentials, and I had convinced myself that this simplicity was what I deserved, what I had earned after decades of hard work. The knock on my door that evening came as a surprise. I rarely had visitors anymore. My neighbors were polite but distant, and the few friends I had left had either moved to warmer climates or passed away. I shuffled to the door, my knees protesting with each step, and peered through the peephole. Emily stood there, soaked from the rain, her dark hair plastered to her face, my daughter. I hadn't seen her in person for almost 2 years, though we exchanged brief phone calls on holidays and birthdays. Calls that lasted maybe 5 minutes, filled with polite questions, and even more polite answers that revealed nothing of substance. I opened the door. "Emily? What are you doing here?" She didn't answer immediately. Just stood there, water dripping from her coat onto my doormat, her eyes red and swollen. She had been crying. At 50 years old, my daughter looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. There were lines around her mouth I didn't remember seeing before, and gray streaks in her hair that she hadn't bothered to hide. "Can I come in?" Her voice was hoarse. I stepped aside, suddenly aware of how small and cluttered my apartment must look to her. Newspapers stacked on the coffee table, dishes in the sink, the faint smell of old coffee, and something I couldn't quite identify. The smell of a man living alone, letting things slide. She walked past me into the living room, leaving wet footprints on the worn carpet. I closed the door and turned to face her, waiting. In my family, we had always been good at waiting. Good at silence. It was speaking that we struggled with. "I need to talk to you," Emily said finally, not bothering to remove her coat. She stood in the middle of my living room like she didn't plan to stay long. "Sit down. You're dripping everywhere. Let me get you a towel." "I don't want a towel, Dad." Her voice was sharper than I expected. "I want to talk." I nodded slowly, moving back to my chair, my safe place. The springs creaked as I settled into it, a sound that had become as familiar as my own breathing. Emily remained standing. She looked around the apartment, taking in the details I had stopped noticing years ago. The photographs on the wall, mostly of her as a child, none recent. The bookshelf filled with technical manuals and history books, spines uncracked for years. The television that was on more often than not, filling the silence with other people's voices. "How long have you been living like this?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like you're waiting to die." The words hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but she cut me off. "I've been going to therapy, Dad, for 3 years now. Twice a week, sometimes more. Do you know what we talk about?" I didn't answer. I had a feeling I didn't want to know. "We talk about you. We talk about Mom. We talk about how I grew up in a house where silence was the only language spoken, where showing emotion was weakness, where asking for affection was met with a lecture about responsibility and duty." Her voice was rising now, years of bottled frustration spilling out. "I'm 50 years old, and I'm just now learning how to tell people what I need, how to ask for help, how to be vulnerable, because you never taught me any of that. You taught me how to be strong, how to be independent, how to solve my own problems. But you never taught me how to be human." I felt my chest tighten. "Emily, I did the best I could." "Did you?" She finally moved, pacing in front of the window. "Did you really? Because from where I'm standing, you did the easiest thing possible. You went to work, you provided financially, and you checked out emotionally. You were there but not there. Present but absent. That's not fair." I worked 60 hours a week to give you a good life, to pay for your education, your wedding, everything you needed. I didn't need things, Dad." She spun to face me, and I saw tears streaming down her face. "I needed you. I needed a father who would sit with me when I was scared, who would tell me he was proud of me, not just when I got good grades or won awards, but just for being his daughter. I needed someone who would show me that love wasn't just responsibility, it was connection." I sat there frozen. Every word she said felt like a hammer blow, not because they were cruel, but because somewhere deep inside, I knew they were true. "You want to know what my therapist asked me last week?" Emily's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She asked me if I loved you, and I couldn't answer. Not because I don't love you, but because I don't know how. You never showed me what that looked like between us." She walked over to me then, kneeling down so we were at eye level. Her eyes, so much like Margaret's, searched my face. "You're a burden, Dad. You've been for a long time. Not because you're old or because you might need help someday, but because carrying around all this pain, all this unresolved hurt, all these words we never said to each other, ... it's crushing me. I can't do it anymore." There it was, the truth laid bare between us. She thought I was a weight she had to carry. And maybe she was right. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, though the words felt inadequate. "Sorry isn't enough." She stood up, wiping her eyes. "I came here tonight because I need to know something. I need to know if you're capable of more than this. More than apologizing and going back to the way things were. Because if you're not, if this is all there is, then I need to let you go. For my own sake. For my own survival." She walked to the door, her hand on the knob, and looked back at me one last time. "I'm giving you a choice, Dad. You can keep living like this, holding on to whatever pride or stubbornness is keeping you locked in this apartment, in this life. Or you can try. Really try to be more, to understand, to change. Emily, I'm 78 years old. People don't change at my age. Then I guess I have my answer." She opened the door, and the sound of rain rushed in, along with a cold wind that made me shiver. "Wait," I said, but she was already gone, disappearing into the rainy night, leaving me alone with her words echoing in my empty apartment. I sat in that chair for hours after she left, watching the rain continue to fall. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I let myself cry. Not the dignified, controlled tears of a man at a funeral, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone who had finally been forced to look at himself and didn't like what he saw. She had called me a burden, and somewhere in the deepest part of me, I understood why. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Emily's words over and over. Each repetition felt like peeling back another layer of denial I had wrapped around myself for years. By the time dawn broke, gray and reluctant through my bedroom window, I had made a decision. I would try. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I would try. The first step, I realized, was understanding. Not just Emily's pain, but my own role in creating it. I needed to look back, really look back at the man I had been, at the father I had failed to be. I spent the morning digging through old boxes stored in my hall closet. Photographs, letters, report cards, artifacts of a life lived but not fully examined. My hands trembled as I sorted through them, not from age but from something else. Fear, maybe. Or regret. There was Emily at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing she had made. I remembered that day vaguely. She had been so excited to show me, running to the door when I came home from work. What had I said? I couldn't remember my response, but I remembered my impatience. I had been tired, stressed about a project deadline, and I had barely glanced at the picture before telling her it was nice and heading to my study to work. Another photo. Emily at 12, in her soccer uniform, holding a small trophy. 3rd place in the regional tournament. Margaret had taken her, had sat through all the games, had been the one cheering from the sidelines. I had been at a conference in Chicago that weekend. An important conference, I had told myself. One I couldn't miss. The pattern emerged as I went through box after box. Birthday parties where I was barely visible in the background. School plays where my seat was empty. Parent-teacher conferences that Margaret attended alone. I had always had a reason, always had an excuse. Work was important. Providing was important. Someone had to be the responsible one. But what I saw now, looking at these frozen moments of Emily's childhood, was absence. My absence. I had been there physically for some of it, but emotionally? Emotionally, I had checked out long before she was born. Around noon, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, and asked if she could give me a ride to the public library. She seemed surprised but agreed. At the library, I found what I was looking for: parenting books, psychology books, anything that might help me understand what Emily had tried to tell me. I sat at a long wooden table surrounded by younger people, students mostly, and read. One book talked about attachment theory, how children need emotional connection and responsiveness from their parents to develop healthy relationships later in life. Another discussed generational trauma, how patterns of emotional distance can be passed down like genetic traits. That hit close to home. My own father had been a stern, silent man who believed that discipline and hard work were the only things worth teaching. He never hugged me, never told me he loved me, never asked about my feelings or dreams. He provided, and that was enough. Or so I had always believed. But seeing it written there, in clinical terms backed by research and case studies, I couldn't deny the truth anymore. I had simply repeated what I had learned. I had become my father, and in doing so, I had hurt my daughter the same way I had been hurt. The realization was devastating and liberating at the same time. I checked out several books and had Mrs. Patterson drive me home. She tried to make small talk, but I was too lost in thought to respond with much more than monosyllables. She gave me a concerned look when she dropped me off, but I assured her I was fine. Back in my apartment, I made myself a sandwich I didn't eat and sat down to read more. One chapter discussed the concept of emotional labor, how constantly managing someone else's emotions or walking on eggshells around them. I thought about Margaret, how she had always been the mediator between Emily and me, how she had made excuses for my distance, tried to soften the impact of my absence. After Margaret died, there had been no buffer anymore. Just Emily and me, and all the unspoken tension that had been building for decades. She had tried to reach out at first, I remembered now. She had called more often, suggested we have dinner together, offered to help me with things around the apartment. But I had pushed her away, insisting I was fine, that I didn't need help, that I could manage on my own. Independence. That was another value my father had drilled into me. Never burden others. Never show weakness. Never admit you need help. I had worn it like armor, not realizing it was actually a cage. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out an old notebook and started writing. Not a letter to Emily, not yet, but a letter to myself. An accounting of failures and mistakes, of opportunities missed and damage done. The words came slowly at first, then faster. I wrote about the time Emily had tried to tell me about being bullied at school, and I had dismissed it with advice to toughen up and ignore them. I wrote about her high school graduation, where I had shown up late and left early, missing the party Margaret had planned. I wrote about her wedding, where I had given a brief, stiff toast and spent most of the reception sitting alone at a corner table, uncomfortable with the emotion and celebration around me. I wrote about the birth of her son, Jacob, my grandson. I had visited once in the hospital, held the baby for maybe 5 minutes, made awkward small talk with Emily and her husband, David, and then left. I had never really gotten to know Jacob. He was 16 now, and I had seen him maybe a dozen times in his entire life. That thought stopped me cold. I had a grandson who was practically a stranger. What had Emily told him about me? Did he even think about me at all? The writing turned messier, my handwriting deteriorating as the emotions I had suppressed for so long started to surface. I wrote about Margaret, about how I had taken her for granted, assumed she would always be there to smooth things over, to translate my silence into something that resembled love. I wrote about the day she died, how I had sat by her hospital bed and couldn't find the words to tell her what she meant to me. How I had held her hand and stayed silent, even as she took her last breath. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. My hand ached, my eyes burned, and the notebook was filled with pages of truth I had never allowed myself to acknowledge. I looked at what I had written and saw a life half-lived. A life spent running from vulnerability and connection, hiding behind work and duty and a misguided sense of what it meant to be a man. A father, a husband. Emily had called me a burden, but now I understood. The real burden wasn't my age or potential future needs. It was the weight of all this unprocessed pain, all these unspoken words, all this love that I had never learned how to express. I thought about calling her, but it was too late, and I didn't know what to say yet. Sorry still didn't feel like enough. She had said she needed to know if I was capable of more. But what did that mean? What did more look like for a man who had spent his entire life being less than he should have been? I fell asleep in my chair, the notebook on my lap, the rain still falling outside. In my dreams, I was young again, standing in the doorway of Emily's childhood bedroom, watching her sleep. In the dream, I walked over and kissed her forehead, told her I loved her, tucked her in properly. All the things I had never done in real life. When I woke up, my face was wet with tears, and I knew that whatever trying looked like, I had to start now. Before it really was too late. 3 days passed before I worked up the courage to reach out to Emily. 3 days of reading, thinking, and reliving moments I had tried to forget. But I knew that a phone call wouldn't be enough. I needed to show her, not just tell her, that I was serious about changing. I decided to write her a letter. A real letter, with pen and paper, taking the time to choose each word carefully. But before I could do that, I realized I needed to understand something else. Something I had been avoiding. I needed to talk to David, Emily's husband. David had always been kind to me, polite and respectful, even though I had never made much effort to know him. He was a contractor, built houses with his own hands, a practical man who seemed to understand things about family that I had never grasped. He and Emily had been married for 22 years, and somehow their relationship had survived, despite my daughter having me as a template for what a man should be. I called him at his office. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Hey, Richard. Is everything okay? Is Emily all right?" "She's fine. Well, We had a difficult conversation the other night. I was wondering if we could meet. Talk, if you have time." There was a pause. "Sure, I can stop by after work today. Around 6? "I'd appreciate that." He arrived right on time, still in his work clothes, carrying a 6-pack of beer. "Thought we might need these," he said with a slight smile. We sat in my living room, neither of us quite knowing how to start. David opened 2 beers, handed me one, and took a long sip from his own. "So," he said finally, "Emily came home pretty shaken up the other night. She told me what happened." I nodded, gripping the beer bottle. "I imagine she was upset." "Upset doesn't quite cover it." David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Richard, can I be honest with you? Please. I've been married to your daughter for more than 2 decades. And in all that time, I've watched her struggle with something she could never quite name. She's brilliant at her job, amazing with Jacob, generous with her friends. But there's always been this wall inside her, this place she can't quite reach. And whenever we get close to it, whenever something touches that deep hurt, it always comes back to you." The words stung, but I forced myself to listen. "She told me once that she doesn't know how to receive love. She knows how to give it, how to show it, but when someone tries to give it back, she freezes up, gets defensive, pushes them away. Do you know how hard it's been, loving someone who can't quite believe they deserve to be loved?" I looked down at my hands. Old hands, spotted with age, trembling slightly. "I didn't realize. How could you? You were never around long enough to see." He said it without malice, just stating a fact. Richard, I'm not here to make you feel worse. God knows Emily already did that. But I think you need to understand something. What happened between you two, it didn't just affect her. It affected Jacob too. My head snapped up. Jacob, how? David took another drink, his jaw tight. Kids pick up on things, you know. They see how their parents interact, how they handle emotions, how they show love. Emily has tried so hard not to repeat your mistakes. She tells Jacob she loves him every single day. She shows up for his games, his concerts, everything. But there's something else she does that breaks my heart. He paused, and I saw his eyes getting red. She apologizes, constantly. She apologizes when she can't make it to something because of work. She apologizes when she's tired or stressed. She apologizes for needing space or time alone. It's like she's terrified of becoming you, so terrified that she bends over backward, trying to prove she's not. And in the process, she's exhausting herself. I felt sick. I never wanted that for her. I know. But that's what happened anyway. David set down his beer and looked at me directly. Here's the thing though, Richard. Despite everything, she still wants a relationship with you. If she didn't care, she wouldn't have come here the other night. She wouldn't have said what she said. She would have just quietly cut you out of her life and moved on. She said she might do exactly that. She said she might have to. For her own health. And I support that decision if it comes to it. But she doesn't want to. That's why I'm here. She doesn't know I came, by the way. I just thought you should know what's really at stake. What do you mean? David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. 3 months ago, Emily broke down in our kitchen. Just completely broke. She had just gotten back from her therapy appointment, and something her therapist said had hit her hard. I found her on the floor, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. He turned back to me, and I saw tears on his face now. She told me she felt like half a person. Like there was this hole inside her where something was supposed to be, but it had never been filled. She said she was tired of pretending it didn't matter, tired of being strong, tired of carrying around this weight. She looked at me and said, I don't want Jacob to feel this way. I don't want him to grow up wondering why his mother couldn't show him what love looked like, because she never learned it herself. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. That's when she started going to therapy more often. That's when she decided she had to confront this, to confront you, because she's not just trying to heal herself anymore. She's trying to break the cycle for Jacob, for her family. And Richard, if you can't help her do that, if you can't meet her halfway, then she will let you go. And it will destroy her, but she'd do it anyway because she has to survive. The room was silent except for the sound of cars passing outside and the hum of my old refrigerator in the kitchen. I don't know how to be what she needs, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it. You just have to try. David came back and sat down. Tell her the truth. Not the convenient truth, not the easy explanations, but the real truth. Why were you the way you were? What were you afraid of? What did you think being a father meant? My own father ... Yeah, Emily told me about him. Sounds like he was a piece of work. But Richard, you're not him. You don't have to be. You have a choice here right now, to be different. To break your own cycle. He picked up his beer again, finished it, and stood up. I should go. Emily will wonder where I am. He headed for the door, then stopped and turned back. One more thing. Jacob's been asking about you lately. Wants to know why he doesn't have a relationship with his grandfather. Emily doesn't know what to tell him. She doesn't want to poison him against you, but she also doesn't want to lie and pretend everything's fine. So maybe, if you do decide to try, it shouldn't just be for Emily. It should be for him too. Give him what you couldn't give her. A grandfather who's present, who shows up, who loves out loud. After he left, I sat in the darkness of my apartment for a long time. Jacob, my grandson, asking about me, wanting to know me. The thought was both terrifying and inspiring. I thought about what David had said. Tell her the truth, the real truth. That's when I finally understood what Emily had been asking for. She didn't need me to change who I was overnight. She didn't need me to suddenly become someone I had never been. She needed me to be honest, to be vulnerable, to stop hiding behind excuses and face the real reasons I had been the way I was. I pulled out my notebook again and started writing. But this time, I wasn't writing to myself. I was writing to Emily. The letter took me 3 days to complete. I wrote, crossed out, rewrote, crumpled up pages and started over. I had never been good with words, especially words about feelings, but I forced myself to push through the discomfort. In the letter, I told her about my father, about growing up in a house where affection was absent, where the only measure of love was provision. I told her about my mother, who died when I was 12, and how my father never spoke of her again after the funeral. How I learned that grief was something you buried deep and never examined. I told her about meeting Margaret, about how she had been so warm and open, and how I had been drawn to her precisely because she was everything I wasn't. How I had hoped that by marrying her, some of that warmth would somehow transfer to me, but it didn't work that way. Instead, I had let her carry the emotional weight of our family while I retreated into work. I wrote about my fear. Fear of being vulnerable, of being hurt, of disappointing people, of being seen as weak. Fear that if I let down my guard, if I let people see who I really was underneath the tough exterior, they would find nothing there worth knowing. I wrote about Emily specifically, about the day she was born and how I had held her in the hospital and been overwhelmed by terror. This tiny, perfect person was depending on me, and I had no idea how to be what she needed. So I had defaulted to what I knew: work hard, provide, be responsible. Keep your distance so you can't hurt her, can't fail her. But I had failed her anyway. In trying to protect her from my inadequacy, I had withheld the one thing she actually needed: my presence, my attention, my love expressed not through providing but through connection. I wrote about the regrets. Every missed moment, every dismissal of her feelings, every time I had chosen work or silence over engagement. I didn't make excuses. I just laid it all out. And then I wrote about what David had told me, about how my emotional absence had affected not just her, but her entire life. Her marriage, her relationship with Jacob, her relationship with herself. How the damage I had done had rippled out in ways I had never imagined. I told her I understood if she needed to walk away, that I would respect her decision, whatever it was, but that if she was willing to give me a chance, I wanted to try. Really try. Not to become someone different overnight, but to start the hard work of understanding, of being honest, of being present in whatever time I had left. I ended the letter with something I had never said to her before, or at least never said in a way that meant anything. Emily, I love you. I have always loved you, even when I was incapable of showing it. You deserved a better father than me, but you got me instead. I can't change the past, but I can choose how I show up now. If you'll let me, I want to try to be the father you needed, even if it's 30 years too late, even if I fail at it. I want to try. I read the letter over multiple times, tears blurring the words. It was the most honest thing I had ever written, the most vulnerable I had ever allowed myself to be. The next morning, I walked to the post office and mailed it. No backing out now. The words were out there in transit, soon to be in Emily's hands. I went home and waited. That's all I could do. Wait and hope that honesty, finally, might be enough to build a bridge over the gulf I had created between us. Days passed. Then a week. I started to think she wasn't going to respond. That maybe the letter had been too little, too late. That maybe I had lost her for good. But then, on a Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen. I answered, my hand shaking. "Hello, Dad." Her voice was thick like she had been crying. "I got your letter." "And?" There was a long pause. Then she said something that made my heart stop. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. Can you come over tomorrow? Can we talk in person?" "Of course." "What time?" Around 2, Dad, bring the letter with you. I want to read parts of it again. With you there. After we hung up, I sat down heavily in my chair. She wanted to talk. That was good, right? But there was something in her voice, something heavy and scared, that made me uneasy. What could she need to tell me? What hadn't she said yet? Tomorrow, I would find out. Tomorrow, everything might change again. I arrived at Emily's house at exactly 2 o'clock, the letter folded carefully in my jacket pocket. Her home was in a quiet suburb about 20 minutes from my apartment, a 2-story house with blue siding and a well-maintained yard. I had been here before, of course, but rarely. Maybe a handful of times for holidays or major events, each visit brief and uncomfortable. Emily answered the door before I could knock. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing old jeans and a sweatshirt, and I realized this was the most casual I had seen her in years. No armor of professional clothing, no makeup to hide behind. Just her raw and real. "Come in," she said quietly. The house was unusually quiet. "Where's David and Jacob?" I asked them to give us some time. David took Jacob to a movie. She led me into the living room, where 2 cups of coffee sat on the coffee table, steam rising from them. "Sit down, Dad." I sat on the couch, and she sat across from me in an armchair. We didn't speak for a long moment, both of us gathering our thoughts, preparing for whatever this conversation was going to be. "I've read your letter about 15 times, Emily said finally. "I've cried over it, got angry at it, felt relief from it, felt sad again. It was everything I needed to hear and everything I was afraid to hear at the same time. I meant every word. I know. I can tell. That's what made it so hard to read." She picked up her coffee but didn't drink it, just held the cup in her hands like she needed something to hold on to. "You talked about cycles, about how your father's emotional distance created your emotional distance, about how you didn't know any other way to be. That's right. And you talked about how you realized your distance affected me, affected my whole life." Her voice cracked slightly. "That was the hardest part to read because it's true. It's so true, Dad, and I've been dealing with that truth in therapy for years now. Emily, I'm so sorry. I know, and I appreciate that. But there's something else, Dad. Something I need to tell you about why your emotional distance hurt so much. Why it messed me up in ways that go beyond what you might think." She set down her coffee cup and took a deep breath, like she was preparing to jump off a cliff. "When I was 14, something happened. Something I never told you. Something I never told Mom either, actually." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "There was a boy at school. His name was Marcus. He was 16, a junior when I was a freshman. He was charming, paid attention to me, made me feel special. And Dad, I was so starved for male attention, so desperate for someone to see me and care about me, that I fell for it completely. I felt cold dread seeping into my chest. We dated for about 3 months. Well, dated isn't the right word. We hung out after school, talked on the phone. He told me he loved me. And one night, he pressured me into doing things I wasn't ready for." Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept going. I said no multiple times. But he kept pushing, kept saying if I really loved him, if I really wanted to be with him, I would do this. And Dad, I was 14 and stupid, and so desperate to be loved that I gave in. Not because I wanted to, but because I thought that was what love looked like. I thought that's what you did when someone said they loved you. You gave them what they wanted. I couldn't breathe. Emily ... It wasn't violent. I wasn't beaten or physically forced. But I didn't want it, and he knew that. And when it was over, I felt ... broken. Used. Like I had given away something important for nothing. He broke up with me a week later, moved on to some other girl. And I was left feeling like it was my fault. Like I had done something wrong. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't stop. I wanted to tell Mom. God, I wanted to tell someone. But I didn't know how. And I thought about coming to you, about telling you what happened. But Dad, we didn't have that kind of relationship. We never talked about real things, about feelings or problems, or anything that mattered. You weren't safe for that. So I kept it inside. She looked at me directly, and the pain in her eyes was unbearable. And the worst part? The thing that messed me up the most? It wasn't just what Marcus did. It was that I convinced myself it happened because I didn't know what love looked like. Because you never showed me. Never taught me. So when some boy said he loved me and then used me, I thought that was normal. I thought that's what happened when men said they loved you. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. No, Emily, no. I know better now. Years of therapy have taught me that what happened wasn't my fault. That Marcus was manipulative and wrong, and that nothing about what he did was love. But Dad, you have to understand. That pattern, that belief that love meant sacrificing yourself, that it meant being used and then abandoned, that came from somewhere, and a lot of it came from watching you. Watching you say you loved us but never showing up, never being present, never demonstrating what real love, healthy love, actually looks like. She wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. After that, I built walls, huge walls. Because if that was what love did to you, I wanted nothing to do with it. I dated in college, but I never let anyone close. Never let anyone really know me. And then I met David. For the first time she smiled slightly, though tears were still falling. David was different. He was patient. He saw through my walls, and instead of pushing through them, he just sat outside them and waited. Showed me, day after day, that he wasn't going anywhere. That love didn't mean using someone or abandoning them or being emotionally absent. It took me 3 years to believe him. 3 years to let myself be vulnerable with him. To trust that he wouldn't hurt me. David's a good man, I said, my voice rough. He is. But even with him, even in a healthy relationship, I struggle. I struggle to believe I deserve love. I struggle to accept affection without suspicion. I struggle to be vulnerable without feeling like I'm setting myself up to be hurt. And all of that, Dad, all of that goes back to you. To growing up in a house where love was never expressed, never demonstrated, never made safe. She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. That's why I came to your apartment that night. That's why I said you were a burden. Because carrying around all this pain, all this damage, all this work I've had to do to unlearn the things you taught me without meaning to ... It's exhausting, and I realized I couldn't keep doing it alone. I needed to tell you. To make you understand what your emotional absence actually did. I sat there, unable to speak, unable to move. Every word she said was another nail in the coffin of the man I thought I had been. The good provider, the responsible father, the man who did his best. That man didn't exist. He had never existed. What existed was a scared, damaged person who had passed his damage down to his daughter, who had left her so vulnerable that she had been hurt in ways I could never undo. Emily, I finally managed to say, I am so sorry. For all of it. For not being there. For not teaching you what love should look like. For not being safe enough for you to come to when you were hurt. I know you are. Your letter made that clear. She took a shaky breath. But Dad, sorry isn't enough. I need more than sorry. I need to know that you understand. Really understand. Not just the surface level, I should have been a better father understanding, but the deep, painful understanding of what your absence actually cost. I'm starting to understand. I think I'm starting to see it. Good, because here's the thing. I have a son. Jacob is 16. The same age Marcus was when he hurt me. And every day, I look at Jacob and I think about what kind of man he's becoming. What he's learning about love and relationships and how to treat people. She looked at me intently. David is an amazing father. He's present, he's affectionate, he tells Jacob he loves him. He demonstrates healthy masculinity every single day. But Jacob barely knows you. And the little he does know is this distant, closed-off figure who shows up occasionally and says almost nothing. And I'm terrified, Dad. I'm terrified that despite everything David does, Jacob might still absorb some of your patterns, some of your emotional distance. That's when it hit me. The full weight of what she was saying. This wasn't just about me and Emily anymore. It was about Jacob. About breaking the cycle before it could reach another generation. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Tell me what you need, and I'll do it. I need you to be real. I need you to stop hiding. I need you to have an actual relationship with Jacob, but not the fake, surface-level kind you had with me. A real one, where you talk to him, listen to him, show him that men can be emotional and vulnerable and present." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her yard. "And I need you to keep working on yourself. Keep reading, keep learning, keep trying to understand. Because, Dad, this conversation, this is just the beginning. We have decades of stuff to work through. And it's going to be hard and messy and painful. But if you're willing to do that work, if you're really willing to change, then I'm willing to try. To give us another chance." I stood up too, walked over to where she was standing. For the first time in I don't know how long, I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder. She tensed for a moment, then relaxed slightly. "I'm willing," I said. "I'm scared, and I don't know if I can do this, but I'm willing to try. For you, for Jacob, for me." She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay then. Let's try." We stood there for a moment in silence, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. It was a start, a small, fragile start. "Jacob's going to be home in about an hour," Emily said. "Would you like to stay for dinner? We could talk, all of us. Start figuring out what this new relationship looks like." I'd like that very much, and so I stayed. When Jacob and David got home, there was awkwardness, but there was also something else, an openness, a willingness to try. That night, sitting around Emily's dinner table, I started learning how to be present, how to listen, how to ask questions and wait for real answers instead of just filling silence with meaningless small talk. It wasn't easy. Old habits pulled at me, urging me to retreat, to protect myself. But every time I felt that pull, I looked at Emily, at Jacob, at David, and I reminded myself why I was doing this. I was breaking a cycle, and it started with me. 6 months passed after that dinner. 6 months of weekly visits, phone calls, and slowly rebuilding something that resembled a relationship. It wasn't smooth. There were setbacks and difficult conversations, and moments when I wanted to give up, to retreat back into the comfortable numbness I had known for so long. But I didn't, because Emily held me accountable, and I held myself accountable. I continued reading every book on emotional health and parenting I could find. I started seeing a therapist myself, a woman named Dr. Ramirez, who specialized in working with older adults dealing with lifelong patterns of emotional avoidance. In our sessions, we unpacked my relationship with my father, with Margaret, with Emily. We talked about masculinity and vulnerability and what it means to be human. It was painful work. There were sessions where I cried, where I got angry, where I wanted to quit. But Dr. Ramirez was patient, and slowly I started to change. Not who I was fundamentally, but how I showed up in the world. I learned to say, "I love you," without it feeling like pulling teeth. I learned to ask people how they were feeling and actually wait to hear the answer. I learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was courage. And I learned to be a grandfather to Jacob. That was perhaps the most rewarding part of all this. Every Sunday, Jacob would come over to my apartment, and we would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes we watched sports, sometimes we just talked. He told me about school, about his friends, about his dreams of studying environmental science. And I listened, really listened. I told him stories about his mother as a child, but I didn't sugarcoat my role in those stories. I was honest about my failures, about how I had let Emily down. Jacob listened carefully, and one day he asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Grandpa, why are you telling me all this? Why are you being so honest about messing up?" I thought about it for a moment. "Because I want you to know that people can change, that it's never too late to choose to be better." And because I want you to know what real love looks like. Not the version I modeled for your mom, but the real thing. Love means showing up. It means being present. It means saying the hard things and listening to the hard things and not running away when it gets uncomfortable. He nodded slowly. Mom talks about you sometimes. About how hard this has been for both of you. But she says she's proud of you. That you're doing the work. Your mom is an incredible woman. She's stronger than I ever was. She said you were strong too. Just in a different way. She said it takes a lot of strength to admit you were wrong and to change. Those words from Emily, relayed through Jacob, meant more to me than I could express. On a Saturday in late October, Emily called me. Dad, I have something I want to ask you. What is it? Next month is Thanksgiving, and I was thinking, would you want to host it here at the house? You and me and David and Jacob? Maybe we could make it a tradition. Start building new memories. I felt a lump in my throat. I would love that. Good, because there's one more thing. I want you to say grace before dinner, but not the short, quick kind. I want you to really say something. About what you're grateful for. About this family. The idea terrified me. Speaking from the heart, in front of everyone. Putting words to emotions I was still learning to acknowledge. But that was exactly why I needed to do it. Okay, I said. I'll do it. Thanksgiving came. Emily and David cooked an incredible meal, and Jacob set the table, chattering about his latest school project. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing and pie, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. When we sat down to eat, Emily looked at me and nodded. I cleared my throat. Everyone bowed their heads. I'm not good at this, I started, my voice rough. I'm not good at talking about feelings or expressing gratitude or any of this. But I'm going to try. I looked around the table, at these people who had given me a second chance I didn't deserve. I'm grateful for this family. I'm grateful that even though I messed up for most of my life, you didn't give up on me. Emily, you held a mirror up to my face and forced me to look at who I had been. It was painful, but it was necessary. You showed me that love sometimes means telling hard truths. Emily's eyes were shining with tears. David, you taught me what it means to be a good husband and father just by being yourself. You showed me that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites, they're partners. David nodded, his own eyes getting red. And Jacob, you've shown me what it means to have a second chance. Every Sunday we spend together, you teach me something new. You've accepted me despite knowing all my failures, and that's a gift I don't take lightly. I paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I spent most of my life thinking that love was about providing and protecting from a distance. But I was wrong. Love is about being present, about showing up even when it's hard, about letting people see who you really are, mess and all. I'm still learning that. I'm still trying. But I'm grateful for every day I get to keep trying. I looked at Emily again. My daughter told me once that I was a burden. And at the time, it broke my heart. But she was right. The version of me she said that to was a burden. He was carrying around so much pain and damage and refusal to change that he was crushing everyone around him. But I really hope, that the person sitting here now is becoming something different, something lighter. Something that adds to your lives instead of weighing them down. My voice cracked. I love you all, more than I know how to say. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn how to show it. There was silence for a moment, then Emily got up and came over to me. She wrapped her arms around me, and I hugged her back. Really hugged her, tight and long and without the awkwardness that had always been there before. I love you too, Dad, she whispered in my ear. And you're not a burden anymore. You're my father. And that's all I ever wanted you to be. We ate dinner, laughing and talking and sharing stories. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of discomfort, still years of damage that couldn't be undone in 6 months. But it was real. It was honest. It was a family, broken and repaired and learning how to be together. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and I was getting ready to leave, Emily walked me to the door. Dad, I want you to know something. That night I came to your apartment, when I said those things about you being a burden, I didn't know if you would be able to change. I honestly didn't think you could. I was preparing myself to let you go. I know, but you proved me wrong. You did the work. You showed up, you changed. And I'm so proud of you. Those words coming from my daughter meant everything. I'm not done yet, I said. I'm still learning, still trying. I know. We all are. That's what families do. They keep trying. I drove home that night with a full heart. The rain had returned to Cleveland, but this time it felt different. Not like something washing the world away, but like something cleansing, something renewing. In my apartment, I sat in my chair by the window and thought about the journey I had been on, about how close I had come to losing everything that mattered, about how one difficult conversation, one moment of brutal honesty, had changed the trajectory of my life. I thought about my father and the pain he had passed down to me, and I thought about how I had almost passed that same pain down to Emily, to Jacob, but we had broken the cycle. Not perfectly, not completely, but we had made a start. On my coffee table, next to my reading glasses, was a framed photo that Emily had given me. It was from Thanksgiving, all four of us around the table, smiling. Real smiles, not the forced kind from years past. In the photo, I had my arm around Jacob, and Emily was looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. Pride, love, hope. I picked up the phone and dialed Emily's number. She answered on the second ring. Dad, everything okay? Everything's fine. I just wanted to tell you something. What? Thank you. For not giving up on me. For giving me this chance. For being brave enough to tell me the truth, even when it hurt. You saved my life, Emily. You really did. Her voice was thick when she replied. You saved mine too, Dad, by choosing to change. By choosing us. We talked for a few more minutes, then said goodnight. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the rain-soaked streets of Cleveland. I was 79 years old. I had wasted most of my life being emotionally closed off, scared, and alone. But I still had time. Not a lot, maybe, but enough. Enough to keep learning. Enough to keep showing up. Enough to be the father and grandfather I should have been all along. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. And inside my small apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Peace. Not the peace of giving up or settling or accepting failure, but the peace of trying, of opening yourself up to connection and vulnerability and love, even when it's terrifying, even when you don't know if you'll succeed. The peace of finally becoming the man I was always meant to be. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift Emily had given me. Not forgiveness, though that was part of it. Not a second chance, though that too was important. She had given me the truth, and the truth, as painful as it was to hear, had set me free. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it all. The regret, the hope, the love, the fear, the gratitude. All of it, woven together into something complex and beautiful and real. This was what it meant to be human. To feel everything. To let yourself be vulnerable. To connect with others even knowing you might get hurt. My father had never understood that. He had lived his entire life behind walls, and he had died alone, surrounded by silence. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. I had been given a chance to choose differently. To break the cycle. To show my daughter and my grandson what it meant to love out loud. To be present. To be real. And I was going to take that chance. Every single day I had left. The weight of silence that had defined my life for so long had finally been lifted. In its place was something lighter, something that didn't crush, but instead supported. The weight of connection, of family, of love. And I was ready to carry it.